After watching The Last of Us episode 6 multiple times now, I truly do believe that it is now my favorite episode so far. After the first time watching it, it was in my top 3 with episodes 3 and 5, but after watching it again, in my opinion, it is my favorite episode so far. And one of the biggest reasons why is because a lot of the focus in this episode was on Joel, and one thing that wasn't in the games that they're exploring in the show is that Joel has PTSD from what happened to Sarah, and there was, I think, 3 times in this episode where Joel starts to grab his chest and he's having a panic attack because he's very scared and he doesn't know how to handle it. And the first time we get that is at the beginning of the episode, whenever Joel and Ellie are talking to that couple that live in the middle of nowhere, and they were saying that, if your brother is beyond this river, then he's probably dead. And that really scared Joel. And whenever they were leaving, Joel started to grab his chest because he was terrified that Tommy might be dead. And then the next time is whenever Joel and Ellie are walking out in the middle of nowhere, and then they get surrounded by people from Jackson, and they have this dog that is going to smell and see if they're infected or not. And obviously the dog smells Joel. Joel's clean. And then the dog starts to smell Ellie, and the dog is starting to bark and stuff. So Joel's thinking that the dog's going to smell her and is going to kill her, and it happens again. He gets a panic attack and he freezes up. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to say. And then I believe the last time they do it is whenever Joel gets in an argument with Tommy, and then he storms out of the bar and he grabs a pole and he has another panic attack whenever he sees Sarah, or what he thought was Sarah. And that scene was very, very hard to watch because, one change that they made from the game to the show is that Tommy is going to be a dad. In the game, Tommy isn't a dad, but in the show, Maria is a few months pregnant. And Tommy said that, just because life ended for you doesn't mean it has to end for me. And that really pissed off Joel. Yeah, it was just very well done on what they've done to Joel's character. I really love that they're diving into the mindset and the trauma that Joel has gone through in these past 20 years ever since Sarah died. And one thing that was very, very cool to see was the fact that we got to actually see the inside of Jackson. And one thing that I learned watching the podcast episode with Craig, Neil, and Troy when they talked about episode 6 is Neil was saying how originally in the first game, because in the final version we got of The Last of Us, whenever Ellie and Joel go to Jackson, you go up on this mountainside and you see the outside of Jackson. You never actually go inside of the town. And Neil was talking about how originally they were trying to go into Jackson, like that's how you would meet Tommy and Maria instead of the hydroelectric dam, which is actually what they did in the game. Neil pretty much said that due to lack of time and resources, they weren't able to fully flesh out Jackson, so that's why they just chose to do it like on the outskirts of Jackson. And I thought that was very, very cool. And one thing that was totally unexpected, and I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but it's the fact that we got a little cameo from a character that only exists in part 2, and that's Dina. I could be wrong. It might be Kat, but at the very least it's either Kat or Dina. And even the guys talked about it in the podcast episode where they were saying there was a little cameo inside that building where Ellie and Joel and Tommy and Maria were eating. And Ellie's like, what are you looking at? Like, I am 99% confident that was Dina. And if so, that was a amazing cameo. Now, there's one scene in particular why I believe this is my favorite episode so far. And that is the scene whenever Ellie and all the kids are watching a movie. And then Ellie notices that Tommy is leaving. And she's like, where's he going? Where's Joel? And then Tommy goes to find Joel, and Joel's by himself in this workshop trying to fix his boots, and Tommy gives him a new pair. And it's just the conversation that they had. The way that Pedro Pascal portrays Joel is blowing my mind. I genuinely thought before episode 1 came out that there was no way that Pedro could live up to Troy Baker's performance as Joel. And especially after this episode and throughout this entire season, but this episode is what kind of sealed it for me. In some ways, I kind of prefer Pedro's performance and portrayal as Joel compared to Troy. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Troy's performance as Joel in the games are perfect. I mean, Joel's my favorite video game character of all time. I still can't explain it. There is something that Pedro Pascal is doing. I can't really explain it. Maybe because they're delving into more of Joel's mentality and his trauma and his PTSD, because they don't really do that in the games. So maybe that's what's different in the show compared to the game. But there's just something about Pedro Pascal that I am so happy that this is who they cast, because I remember whenever they first announced that Pedro Pascal was going to be playing Joel, I didn't really know how to feel. I was like, okay, because I never watched him in anything. I never watched The Mandalorian. You know, I've seen him in Game of Thrones, and that was it. But especially after this episode, and pretty much ever since like the first scene he was in episode 1, he is Joel. Like, he is absolutely perfect as Joel. You know, in that one scene when whenever it's just him and Tommy talking in that little workshop area, and he confesses to Tommy that he's weak and he's very terrified that he's going to get Ellie killed, and he's pretty much begging for Tommy to take Ellie to the Fireflies. You know, just the performance of Pedro Pascal, that might be my favorite scene so far in the entire series. I thought it was extremely well done, and same for Gabriel Luna. I think he's phenomenal as Tommy. But that scene with Joel just being so vulnerable and he was starting to cry, like, it's extremely hard to watch. Like, that scene and the scene when Joel storms out and he thinks that he sees Sarah and Sarah's child, like, those two scenes were extremely hard to watch. But at the same time, they were very beautiful and well done. And now we get to arguably the most famous scene from at least the first game, and in my opinion, one of the most important scenes throughout both games, and that's the ranch scene. Obviously, this time around, it's done a little bit differently because there's no gameplay. In the show, Ellie doesn't take a horse and storm off to some random ranch. She's inside Jackson. So this time around, the scene takes place inside of Jackson. But it's pretty much line for line the exact same as the game, even though, you know, the line where Joel says, "You're treading on some mighty thin ice here," that scene or that line of dialogue is only in the game, and I kind of wish it was in the show, even though Neil kind of confirmed why they didn't use that line, because apparently Joel's dialect in the show is slightly different than the game. So if Pedro would have said that, he said that it would have stuck out like a sore thumb. And yeah, the scene is just extremely well done, even though I do slightly prefer, and I think that it was executed better in the game than the show. But I hate comparing, because this show just complements the game so well, and the game complements the show so well. So I don't really like comparing, like, oh, this version's better, because then automatically you think that the other version is worse when it's not. They're just both executed to the highest level. And yeah, towards the end of the episode, Ellie and Joel finally get to the University of Eastern Colorado, and of course Joel does get stabbed, even though this is a big difference because in the game Joel gets tackled off of a 2-story building and he lands on a piece of rebar and he gets impaled. But in the show, Ellie and Joel see that there's hunters there, so they try and leave, and right before they're able to escape, there's a guy with a baseball bat, and he tries to attack Joel, and Joel gets the better of him and snaps his neck. But because his adrenaline was so high, Joel didn't notice when it happened. Part of the baseball bat got broken off, and he got stabbed with it. So in the game, Joel gets impaled by falling, and in the show, Joel just gets stabbed by a small piece of a baseball bat. And then, you know, from there, it's pretty much the exact same as the game. They're slowly walking on the horse, and then Joel falls off, and Ellie doesn't know what to do. She's begging for him to wake up, and the episode ends. And one thing that I didn't know that I found out in the podcast episode is that apparently the song that is playing at the very end of this episode, like the girl who's singing, that is Craig Mazin's daughter, and I just thought that was very, very cool. And so yeah, guys, overall, I think this episode is a 10 out of 10. I think every episode so far is a 10 out of 10. I mean, obviously I have favorites, 3, 5, and 6, and so far I think episode 6 is my personal favorite so far. And so yeah, guys, I'm going to be very interested down below to hear your thoughts on The Last of Us HBO episode 6.